Start again. Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 58, the Lightsaber edition. So coming up tonight, basically last week when we were doing the Red Challenge, in addition to that was Star Wars Day. So I created a wee picture like this of essentially a Whisky lightsaber. And anyway, quite a few people sort of asked me how I did it. And so last week I said to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, anybody interested in how to do it? And I got quite a few responses saying yes, please. So this evening what I'm going to do is just show you basically in Photoshop how it's done. If you don't have Photoshop, don't worry too much. Other software has similar kind of things you can do with it, but it's just a little bit of fun. Then after that, we're going to be looking at the critique section. As I had a few people send in images looking for a bit of feedback, and so we're going to sort of chat about the photos and possible ways that we could have approached them differently, or concepts, ideas, and maybe even a little bit of editing as well. So VG was playing around with, she's got this picture of the spices, but was trying to put in a different background and was running into a few problems with that. So we're going to chat a little bit about that. Sandra took this photo, one of Anthony Gormley's statues down at the beach, but was wondering about the notion, should it be colour, should it be black and white? And there's a lens flare that's in the middle of it. Does that enhance it or does it detract? So we're going to chat about that as well. Morven's been playing out in the garden, taking photos, found this thing, then threw it into her editing software and played with it even more and put it up and was looking for some feedback with that. Roy is busy playing around with black and white conversions, and he created this, is wondering what he could have done differently. And Nuria was also playing. She's got this print box from the hat, took a photo of it, and then started playing around adding texture and putting it into sepia and what have you. But she wasn't sure whether it was working, whether she'd overdone it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So that's what we've got coming up tonight. Oh, no, one more thing, I forgot about that, is Inga stayed in a tree house some 9 meters off the ground. She took this photo out of the emergency escape hatch, but was wondering, how do you get a better sense of the sheer height or depth of the photo? She feels that this photo doesn't really do justice to just the sheer sort of vertigo-inducing sense of a drop you get when you're actually there. So I'm probably going to spend a little bit of time on this one and talk a little bit more in depth about how to make sure, how you get depth into your photos. So these are the things we're going to chat about tonight. Meanwhile, here we are live on Facebook. Unless you happen to be watching the recorded versions, these do get recorded and then go up to youtube.com/Kim Ayres. If you go there, make sure you subscribe, then you'll be notified as new videos come up. You can find all the previous 57 episodes, plus various other things I've got up there, like behind the scenes videos of shoots that I've done. Lots there. The other thing is when I record these, I'll edit them tonight after the show, and then tomorrow morning I'll do a blog post. kimayres.blogspot.com is where my blog is. So I always shove up a blog on a Wednesday morning along with the recorded version of this podcast. So sometimes the blog's related to the podcast, sometimes it isn't, sometimes there's a kind of loose overlap with it. But if you'd like to get a little bit more workings of my mind as such, you'll find an awful lot more on the blog. Always worth going there. And finally, if you find these things particularly interesting, entertaining, feel that you're getting something out of them and would really like to support these podcasts, then the best place to do that is buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. That's certainly the place where you can support these podcasts. It's not compulsory, but it is always very much appreciated. So with that in mind then, excuse me, it was all a little bit of a panicky start, as I've only got to end up half a minute out of my timing routine, and suddenly everything becomes a last minute rush. We're here, we're live on Facebook, so give me your comments. Tell me who's here, tell me where you're from. So I can see we've got a few comments up already. Maggie saying hi everyone. Nuria says good evening. Roy says hi. Pat says hi from Somerset. It's Somerset Day today. Oh well, I didn't realise that. So yeah, well there's one. And for those who really listen carefully to accents, you might hear that when I say Somerset, I say Somerset, and it's very difficult for me to not put the into Somerset. So it's one of those strange things that when I was growing up, that's the only way I ever heard it said was Somerset. And it's sort of stuck in the way that I pronounce it. Brian says, hi Kim and all who are watching. That's Brian from Dumfries. Stacey says, good afternoon. Beautiful day this Tuesday afternoon. That's from Pennsylvania. Rosie saying, hello everyone from a sunny Isle of Whithorn. Sandra saying, hello everyone from Birmingham. Benedito is saying, evening all. Robert is saying, howdy from Texas. And Mandy says, good evening, everyone. So we've got a crew in tonight. That's all good stuff. Right, so as I go through, leave me comments, ask questions, chat amongst yourselves, and we'll make a start on lightsabers. Yeah, so it's kind of a bit of fun, really. So let's sort of, what I'm going to do then is I'll flick over to Photoshop now, and I'll just take you through what I did with this photo. So I started off with this photo, and I did a whole bunch. I'll not take you through. I'll not edit it like this part live in front of you. I'll just take you through the stages of what I did to get this up to where I then started adding on the lightsaber. So this photo was taken actually here in this room, just about 2 foot over that way. I brought the table through, sat the table down. I put up a black back cloth. I had a softbox, fairly narrow softbox sitting up and just behind my head coming down, and that's giving that overhead light that's coming down behind and then hitting my shoulders and hitting the table. And then I realised that I wasn't really getting quite enough light coming to, most of my face was sort of lost in shadow because the light was coming down. So I had another light coming over from the left to lighten up my face here and sort of catch the edge of the whiskey here. But the biggest shadow you can see here is actually coming from above. So that was my starting point. So then what I wanted to do was I knew I wanted to add in a different kind of background than just having a cloth there. So, but this, as you can see, it's also, you can see all the folds that are getting caught up. So essentially I went through and bit by bit sort of removed and smoothed out the folds so that it wouldn't keep interfering. And then I darkened down that as well. At that point, I then set about adding the wall. So you can see here, what I did was I took a photo I've got of a wall, I blurred it out a little bit and masked it off and sort of set it behind and then darken that down a little bit as well. So essentially, you see, if I take out the, remember that bit where I said I took the folds out? If I leave those folds in, then you can still see the folds on the wall, even if I darken. So it became quite important to take those folds out in order to put the wall in and make it look effective. From there, I sort of darkened down the wall a little bit more, and then I set about doing a much more kind of detailed edit where I darkened the edges, brightened up the middle, created a bit more contrast. Once I got that, I then set about playing with the saturation a bit, and I took down, you can see this blue table here, I made it grey because I didn't really like that blue table. Also took a little bit of colour out of the wall in the background, and this was the photo I kind of ended up with. Next thing I did was I desaturated it, lightened it a bit, and ended up with this. And for the picture that I wanted, which was just that kind of slightly grumpy, grungy, somebody, you know, tell me something I don't already know, kind of cynical feel, holding a glass of whiskey in front of him. Having that desaturated look helped to emphasize that kind of mood. However, when I came to doing the lightsaber effect, it wasn't really working on a very desaturated photo. So I then set about creating, well, actually I'd sort of gone from that, and then I did a sort of slight brighten and blue shift in it. And the reason for doing the blue shift was because I was going to be doing a bright red saber. So the saber then worked itself out in different levels. So what I think I will do here is actually just, I've got the effects already here, but what I want to do really is sort of run through them again and show you how I did them. So once I've got this level here, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. And then I'm going to get a selection tool, or a lasso tool rather. And there's different options here, and I've got one which allows me to create straight lines. So on a separate layer, I'm then going to, out of the whiskey, I'm going to straight up, and let's get it going down into the whiskey. So straight down again. Now I've got that, what I can do is I can paint it white. So I just come into here, I've got that selected, sorry, that's at 59%, so let's put that 100%, and I can paint it white like that. However, I want to have it a little bit fuzzier than that, so I'll just go back a couple of steps, go back to where we've got this layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the selection, I can modify it, and I can feather this a little bit. So I'm going to feather this, I might have to play around a little bit, but let's say I'm going to feather it 20 pixels. And what that does is it just softens the edge a little bit. So it's like that. So now you can see here that it's not right up hard against the edge of the selection, it's gone a little bit soft. And that really is a starting point. Okay, so having created that, so I'll just deselect that. So we've now got a straight white fuzzy line coming up straight out of the whiskey. The next trick is to use, there are things you can do with a layer. So if you go up to the layer option on the top here, you can go to layer style. And within the layer style, there's all sorts of different things, but the one we're really interested in is outer glow. So if I click on outer glow, what this does is this gives me options. So I've got a colour. Now I've currently got this set to red because I was playing around with a red saber, but I could change this to anything. I could change this to blue, green, yellow. So you can see the effect then as I move this up and down, it changes the colour of the lightsaber. Now I decided to do red because last week when we created this for the red challenge, Star Wars Day was the day of the red challenge, so red seemed an obvious thing to do. And for the sake of this, we'll carry on with that. So I can go to red, so I can choose a brighter red, or I can go for a darker red, or somewhere in between, a kind of slight glow, something like that. I think is probably the kind of red that I'm looking for. Now, within having selected that, there are different options here. I can change how much it appears. You can see you can build that up, the opacity of it, so how strong that is. I can change the spread of it, so I can make it much wider and harder, or I can make it narrow and soft, and again you just kind of nudge it out just enough to be able to get it seen and obvious. And then I can change the size of it as well. I can make it, again, this is another version where it becomes kind of harder or softer depending on where you move that slider. And to be honest, what happens is you end up putting it wherever you feel comfortable with it. And that's going to vary slightly depending on the resolution of your photo. If you're starting with a quite low resolution photo, you wouldn't want it to be 54 pixels wide because it could take up half your photo. On a very high resolution photo, you can have it, softer and wider and what have you. So the better quality of your photo, your starting photo, the more options you have to play with. And essentially you just move these sliders up and down until you get something where you think, yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. So having done that, then I then go OK, and what we can see is we've got this beam of light coming up that's got a red glow on it. So the next thing to do is to, maybe what I also want to do is play around. I want to get a little bit of light into this whiskey glass as well, because if it was sort of shooting down and hitting into the whiskey glass. So if I stick with this layer, now what's going to happen is anything, because this red effect is happening on anything that's on this layer, if I take a brush and do that, you can see that it applies this effect to absolutely anything else that I do. So what I'm going to do is not 100%, I'll take that down to 26%. And I will just sort of colour in very slightly, start painting in, make that a little bit brighter. And then maybe if I just kind of, oh, that's way too bright, don't really want that. Something like that I think will probably do, to be honest. So now I've got that effect, that's all very well, that's quite nice. But what I also really want to do is, if I had, you then have to think, if I had a bright red lightsaber going along, it would cast a red glow over the stuff that's going on with it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a hue saturation layer, but I'm going to have to do it underneath the red glow and just immediately above the picture that I'm using. So I'm going to go to hue saturation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over. Well, actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to colorize, and that's going to color the whole thing. And now I can move this and change the color. You can see I can make myself blue, I can make myself purple. And what of course I'm going to do is go to red, and then I'm going to increase that saturation so that that's red. Now, obviously I don't want the whole picture to be red. That's kind of ruining the effect. So this white mask on this, I'm going to fill with black, and what that does, by turning it black, it essentially makes it cuts out the effect you're having. But if I use the paintbrush with white, I can now paint that red back in anywhere. So okay, if I take that back up to full, you can see I can do that, and it will paint the red in wherever the paintbrush goes. Or if I put it back to black, essentially it becomes like an eraser. But the point is that by doing it on a separate layer like this, I'm not destroying the original. I can still go back to, at any point, the original picture. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to, so I start painting it. Now if I paint red, full red straight away, it's just a bit overkill. So I'm going to sort of do it a little bit more softly. I'm going to take that down to, again, something like 25-30%. And so I'll start off with, the most likely place would be on the edge of the waistcoat, on this bit of the jacket, and the hand, get a bit of the face, and this side of the sleeve. But what would also happen is I would have it on the table. Now the thing about the table is that I can make that red out, say, to there. And then if I play again, I'm going to do another 28% on top of that. And I can make it brighter. And each layer that I put just gets that little bit brighter until it kind of comes up to full levels. But by doing it just a little bit at a time, different layers, it means it ends up much brighter, closer to the glass, and then eases off as it moves out towards the side. And so I can then do the same kind of thing here. I can paint it a few times because it would be much brighter on the edge of the shirt and on the back of the hand there. Maybe we'd also have a little bit onto the table here, getting a little bit brighter as you get closer to the picture. Bring it in brighter over the here, redden up the face a little bit. Hat, of course, can't forget the fact that this side of the hat would be caught by it. And so now you can see what we've got is we've got this very much this kind of glow going on. So if I remove that, you can see it now looks like we've got this wonderful glowing red effect. What I might also do is maybe darken down the back a bit. So if I just kind of grab the curves, sort of darken it a fraction. But what I'm really wanting is darker on the, maybe not quite that dark, but just darker on the kind of background and outside. And again, I can use the black brush here to just lighten back up the middle of this. Because really what I want is, I just want the edges. I want you to kind of have that feeling that it's sort of glowing, but then it's sort of moving into a darker corner of the room. Now that I've got that, it then becomes a case of, maybe there's one extra little detail, which is, if I had a lightsaber here, what would be really noticeable is there would be a reflection in my eye. And there isn't. So what I will now do is I'll create a new layer, and I'll take a white brush and bring it right down, and just create like a strip there, except that I don't want it that bright, so I will just take it down to something like that. And then, it's not absolutely perfect, I will play with it maybe a little bit more, or maybe even try a slightly different overlay. Oh, overlay is quite good. And then increase, yeah, because that then, the overlay is allowing for other textures in the eye to come through as well. So that's quite good. In fact, maybe I'll just double that up and then take it down just a little bit more, something like that. So now we've got that effect there. What I might also do, let's just try that same layer effect. We could maybe need a little bit of the slightly stronger red glow in it. So layer style, outer glow. I don't think it's really likely to show up that much, to be honest. It's going to be, all right, no, it's just way too strong actually, because the size, because it's only just a tiny little bit of glow. Yeah, something like that. So now I've got a glow reflection in the eye. So I could do something like that if I wanted. Take that down a bit. And that, therefore, that's basically what I did. So you can kind of create these kind of glowing effects by, in Photoshop, you can play with the layer style. So you create your white light or whatever you want to on a layer, and then that layer, you can create the glow around the layer. And yeah, I guess that's it. So again, if I wanted to go back to this, I can double click on this effect, and I could change the, what was it, outer glow. That's what I wanted. You know, like I say, if I wanted, I could change that to a different color. So say we went to blue, or yeah, let's go green. So I've now changed my glow to green, and then that hue saturation level, which is currently sitting on red, if I take that, I could move that and make that green as well. So the great advantage when you're at this level of editing in Photoshop by using layers is that each element I can have as a separate layer, and then I can go back and change it. An important aspect of editing, and I'll chat about this again a bit later, is the idea of being able to go back and change it if you have another idea, or you change your mind, or you just want to explore something else. So with that in mind, here we go. There we go. Green lightsaber. This makes me one of the good guys this time, rather than the red lightsaber. For those not quite so familiar with Star Wars lore, red lightsaber is the sign of a Sith Lord, which is a baddie. So we'll go with the green, which shows that I'm a goodie on this one. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. that's the secret of creating a lightsaber whiskey. Okay, let's see if we've got any comments. Oh, Benedito says Somerset is correct. Becca's joined us saying evening all. Ingo's here with evening everyone. Sandra says any more than 2 layers in Photoshop and I'm stuck. I still have loads to learn. Well, it's like anything, Sandra. The more you do it, the better you get. It's once you're understanding the notion of layers opens up possibilities. It means that you have the chance to create any adjustments you want onto a separate layer and it doesn't then damage the original image. Rosie says, thanks for the explanation on how to create the lightsaber. Really, really useful. Everything will be glowing now. Well, I want to see you, do one of your, have a Star Wars lightsaber battle with a couple of birds at the feeding table there. Rosie, I'm sure you could create something quite amazing. Stacey says, wonderful. Maria says, I'm the same. I get lost halfway through, but I think I'm going to have a go. Stacey says, still learning about masks. Well, come back and check this. Like I say, you can, this version on Facebook as you're watching live will still be sticking around. You can come and find it on the my Facebook page at Kim Ayres Photography, easily enough. But the problem is, of course, as new things come, it gets pushed further and further down. So if you can't find this one, you always go to YouTube from mid-afternoon tomorrow, and you should be able to find it, and then you can bookmark it and come back, pause it, zoom in a bit, and for that matter, if there's a particular thing you get stuck on, you can always ask me. So the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group is therefore stick your photos in, but also ask me questions about editing. If there's a specific area you want to know, I'm quite happy to go through it in this section of the podcast. Right, okay. So, Roy says, just been reading about layers in Affinity, because Roy recently bought Affinity software. So I've not used Affinity, so I can't comment particularly on that one. But yeah, I think layers now, for any of the more sophisticated editing programs, layers is now a kind of standard way of doing things. So, okay, now, Benedito says, and in fact, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll show you Ben, because Ben was having a little bit of fun with this as well. So let's just, well, where's the picture gone? So Benedito, he took a photo where he was cleaning the car, and he did a conversion to make it look a bit more like a kind of lightsaber. Which I would have imagined, actually trying to clean your car with a lightsaber could be extraordinarily dangerous, far more likely to burn a hole through the side of it. But a lot of fun. So yeah, Ben was playing there, and he's just said in the comments, I used a gradient map using a dark blue, a saturated blue at 50%, and a very light blue, and then painted the mask to give me the glow. Same effect, different method. Great to learn different ways, as each image needs many ways to skin a cat. Stacey says, Infinity and Photoshop, I hear, have similar edits. Right, okay. So what we're going to do then is we're now going to move on to the critique section of the podcast. So this is your chance. The whole point of these podcasts is to help you improve your photography. So it's called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, because it's to help improve your understanding. And so nobody, not even me, is absolutely perfect in all aspects of photography. We're all learning, we're all going, and even the top photographers are learning new things all the time, which is as it should be. And part of the fun of photography is the fact that it's pretty much infinite in what you can learn and then how you can apply it. But we all get stuck. We all have our sticking points where we get so far and then we're not sure what we want, where to go next, or we try something and it just isn't working. We know we're close, but we it isn't there. So what we really need is feedback. And the problem is that when we stick our photos into Facebook, generally speaking, all our friends go, yay, wonderful, and give us lots of likes and loves, which is really nice and feels good for the ego, but doesn't help us improve our photography at all. So the whole point of this podcast is to help you improve. So let me know what your sticking points are. Let me know what your problems are. Put your pictures into the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you're watching this and you haven't joined the group already, just go to Facebook, type in that phrase, you'll find it easily enough. Put your photos in and tell me what it is you are struggling with or what it is you would like to know, and I'll do my best to help. So with that in mind, let's move on to the first of the pictures that we're going to be dealing with this evening. So Nuria. So basically, Nuria stuck in this, in fact, she put in two versions. She put in this, and then she put in another edited version. So this version, I'm assuming, well, it's either been taken in colour and already edited into black and white, or it was taken as black and white straight in the camera. I'm hoping you changed it to black and white afterwards for everything that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago in converting to black and white, which was that you have so many more options if you take the photo in colour and then edit it into black and white. If you take the photo in black and white, I'll just change the settings on the camera to black and white and take the photo, it's done it for you and you're now limited. You can't make any further changes. So if you're thinking you want a black and white photo, take the photo in colour and then turn it to black and white in the software afterwards. Anyway, so we've now got this black and white photo. So what Nuria says is it's amazing what you can find in your house when you have kids. Well, that's certainly true. This is my daughter's alphabet wooden stamp box. I was going for a still life, and I'm not sure which one works better, the black and white or an old vignette. So what she's done here is she's added a vignette to it, turned it to a sepia colour, but also added this sort of texture to it. There's like a kind of crumpled paper texture. So here are both photos. Any critique or feedback will be much appreciated. And by and large, and there was a few people in the group have sort of left a few comments, and quite a few of them I think have sort of generally been that they preferred this edit to the original, to this photo. However, really, what I wanted to talk a little bit about here was the notion of why I think at first glance this one sort of grabs our interest a little bit more. But I think there are some ways that the edit doesn't really work as well as it might have had you sort of either tried something else or thought it through in a slightly different way. And what I'm going to talk about, what I want to mean here is, at this point, okay, let me just flick back here a moment, because there's a point I want to make, which is, I think, one of the reasons we love photography, one of the reasons we got into photography, we started playing with the camera and then it hooked us and it grabbed us, is because photos give us a chance to see the world in a different way, in a way that we don't usually do. Whether it's freezing a moment of time, we might see a street scene where people are moving about, we go click and it captures a moment and we get a chance to really explore that photo, or capturing even, a photo of our partner or one of our kids who are always moving and always changing. We get a chance to look and see it in a slightly different way, in a way that isn't the way we would normally see. You can use macro lenses and zoom in and get details that are normally outwith the human eye. You can freeze motion from water, whether you're freezing water and all the droplets are really kind of sharp and clear like little crystals frozen in midair, or you can smooth it out by using a long exposure and have this sort of creamy misty effect with it. Almost everything we do with photography causes us to look at what we've taken in a slightly different way than the way we would see it with our own eyes, and that is fascinating and that is brilliant, and that is part of why we love doing it. It's what keeps us coming back to it. Now, because of that, what it means is sometimes there's editing things we can do as well. And sometimes we edit things and we throw on a texture, or we move a slider, or we add a particular effect. And it has that same kind of effect. So when we go to something like this, we're now seeing this little print box set of stamps in a way that we've never seen it before. We would never see it like this in real life. I mean, we know what it looks like. Okay, it's black and white. We kind of used to, we don't see the world in black and white unless you're a particular kind of colour blind. But for the rest of us, we're used to seeing it. So that's already sort of one level of abstraction. But we certainly don't see the world in sepia. And then it starts to look like a very, very old photo if it's in sepia. And then because you've vignetted it, that's added more to it. And so that kind of creates an interest. That goes, oh, there's something interesting. And I think, so as an immediate thing, it seems to be, it's more attractive than this. However, the point I really want to get across here, Nuria, is that you could have added, you've changed colour, you've added vignette, but I'm not convinced by the texture. Because really, one of the things I kind of keep coming back to in photography is to understand the narrative. What story are you trying to tell? And when you come to editing your photo, everything you do with that photo is either enhancing or detracting from that narrative. Now, by turning it sepia, adding in that vignette, you are aging the photo. And that's fair enough. That's a choice you can do. But what I suppose I really have the problem with is the textured paper effect, because what it looks like is the textured paper is just sort of put on afterwards, and it's sort of surrounding the box. You can't see it. It's not across the whole image. And so what it really looks like is, it looks like you've got the box and then you've got wallpaper in the background, and maybe a kind of paper table that it's sitting on, which doesn't really make sense. Now, if what you were trying to do was make it look like it had been printed on old paper, then that paper effect should also have been quite strong on the actual box itself. But it isn't. We can't really see it. If it is on there, it's not coming through so well. So it doesn't look like it's been printed on that paper. You've got, just like you've got the shadows in the light parts here, and that sort of gives you that sense here. But if this was really printed on paper, these black bits here would have little kind of highlight bits of shadow. It would have almost that kind of inverse negative effect, because scrumpled paper catches light at different angles. Even if you had a black piece of paper and you scrumpled it, if you're looking at it with any kind of light is going to hit the edges of it. So I think it's one of those things whereby if you wanted to have the paper effect, so it looked like this had been printed on old paper, you would have needed to have that paper effect actually run across the whole part of the box. So other than that, you could, there's other textures you can play around. If you just wanted to have the texture on the table or a different texture on the wall, these things are all ways of sort of playing with it for sure. But if you're trying to take this narrative of it's a printing set and you would print on paper, and therefore I want this picture to look like it's printed on paper, you would need to have a slightly different effect in order to make sure that it still looks like paper, even where the box itself is overlaying. So I hope that makes sense, Nuria. Right, okay. Now, do we have any more comments? No. Oh, right, okay. So either nobody's interested in that bit, or your comments haven't caught up yet. Here's back to this thing of the fact that I am approximately 15 to 20 seconds ahead of the rest of you. So if anybody has typed anything, I'm not going to know it for another 15, 20 seconds. Or if you start typing, there's the amount of time it takes you to type, plus the 15 to 20 seconds as well. Stacey says, maybe add letters in the background. I suppose you could sort of type onto the paper, make it look like it was piece of typewritten paper. Other than that, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, Stacey. But yeah, okay, well, what we'll do then is we'll move on to the next picture, which was Sandra. So, all right, Nuria says it does make sense, thank you, good. Yay, getting comments. Right, so where am I? So what I want to do next is, let's go to Sandra's photo. Now, what Sandra did was she took this photo and then did a black and white conversion of it. And Sandra said, which do you think looks best, colour or black and white? And would I keep the sun flare in the photo? Feedback wanted, thanks. More or less, well, it wasn't totally universal. I think one or two people preferred the colour version. Here we go. The majority of people seem to prefer the black and white. But I think it was more or less universal was the idea of removing the sun flare. And it's a bit of an odd one really, because I can see that when you sort of take this photo, that little sun flare that's catching into the middle of the silhouette here does add a bit of texture. Going back to what I was just saying about Nuria's picture, the fact that we get, you know, part of what we're interested in is seeing stuff that we don't normally see when it comes through the camera, and we wouldn't normally see that spot. So it does kind of grab the attention. But at the same time, if you come back to the narrative, which is this silhouetted statue down at the beach, then it doesn't quite make sense. It's sort of there, but I think somebody said it looks a bit like one of these kind of wrestlers' big belts, you know, World Wrestling Federation winner kind of thing, you know, wrapped around the waist. You're kind of trying to interpret it, and because it's there, you are trying to work out why it's there, and then failing to understand why it's there. And all this, at this point, you're not looking at the photo. The whole point of this photo is this I mean, this is, as a whole, I think this is Anthony Gormley's metal statues, and there's several of them down on a beach. And the whole point of this is this sort of sense of this, and the way you've taken it at this point is a man alone, a statue alone, out facing the sea, and the shadow coming back, and it's a very kind of lonely, kind of something melancholic feel to it. And so the silhouette is then good because it's not about the detail of the statue. It becomes a kind of almost hollow vessel to which we can place ourselves. We can imagine ourselves standing there in this place, just gazing out at the sea. And if that's the story, if that's the narrative, then suddenly where the lens flare comes in is just detracting from it. So it doesn't really make quite so much sense. I think the conversion to black and white, that adds to the narrative. Again, a sort of black and white shift we're abstracting. We are removing the colour, and we're sort of moving into a slightly different world again, because it's not a world that we see normally. So I think that adds to that slightly otherworldly feel. It's removing us from the world we exist in into one that we can conjecture and think about and feel. So I think the black and white works. But here, when we convert to black and white, in a way that now seems even more at odds. We can't. There's nothing to make sense of it. As such, it probably would just be better off being removed. And again, well, what we can do is we can do a very quick. Let's just open that with Photoshop and remove it and actually see if it makes any difference. So actually, I'll just close that picture there, and let's just add an extra layer. Take the black. Take a paintbrush and paint over it. And the question is then, does that look better? And yes, I think it does. However, it is entirely up to you. And if you feel like you get something out of that, then that's okay too. It's always worth asking other people's opinions, but at the same time, other people might be missing something that that is doing it for you. It might not be doing it for them, but it could be doing it for you. So anyway, hopefully though that gives you a little bit of extra insight into that, Sandra. Right, okay. Sandra says, yes, it is one of Anthony Gormley's statues. There are 100 in total on the beach. Wow. I've never seen, I must admit, I've never seen that. And it is on my kind of hit list of places to go. So yeah, I'd love it maybe to get down there when the tide's out with my camera at the ready. So yeah. Thanks for sending that one in, Sandra. Okay. Oh, Becca says, looks like a statue local to me by Lawrence Edwards, Man of Stones. Ah, okay, cool. So is that on Becca's down in Norfolk, I think. So yeah, I mean, creating the human figure is obviously, you know, what an awful lot of statues are. But yeah, I think it is interesting. It's an interesting thing to photograph statues, because then if you're essentially the artwork is the statue. Your job then as a photographer is how you're going to interpret somebody else's artwork in that setting. You know, is it about the beach? Is it about the grounds? Is it about the weather? Is it about the way the light is falling? How do these things change the object that somebody else has created? So yeah, if you have statues near you, go out and find them. Oh, Sandra says, my first instinct was to remove the sun flare, but I thought I would ask other people's opinions, and thank you to everyone who replied to my post. Cool. Excellent. Okay, next up, we will go for Roy. So Roy says, I'm at the bottom of a very steep learning curve using my newly acquired Affinity photo editing software. In particular, I'm interested in converting colour to black and white, and this is one of my early attempts. So let's show you, where have we gone? So here's Roy's figure, here's Roy's picture, and then here's the black and white version. He goes on to say, I do like strong contrasty images, but have I overdone it here? What would you do with the image? So it is quite a big difference, this one. So in terms of black and white, to go from a bright yellow dome to a black dome is changing the whole mood and feel. It's a very different thing to have a bright yellow dome on something and then to have a black dome contrasting against the sky. And I'm guessing what you've probably done here is use the blue filter. When we talked before about, let's tell you what, let's just quickly throw this into Photoshop. And when we were talking a couple of weeks back about ways to convert to black and white, then we talked about channels. And in the channels, you have the red, the green, and the blue channel. The red channel here, of which the yellow is closest, and makes it ending up looking very bright, and it pretty much blends into the sky in the background. If we go for the green channel, it's now a little bit darker compared to the background, and if we go to the blue channel, yep, there we go. It's now looking very similar to the photo that you created. So I'm guessing that's the way that you've converted. However, there's something that I really want to talk about here, Roy, which is when we look at this, it's incredibly noisy. You know, it's not a smooth gradient at all. It's very, very, very pixelated. And I think the problem here is that your original photo here as well isn't very high resolution. I don't know whether you've cropped in really close or whether it was done on a phone photo or whatever. I mean, the sky is burnt out. The clouds are completely white. There's no texture in them. It's just a very, very low resolution photo, this. And that becomes problematic when you come to editing. Basically, what you have to remember is that almost any editing process, you are changing the original image, it actually degrades the image to a certain extent. So it's a bit like you know, if you painted a picture and then you put it on a photocopier, the photocopy is never going to be quite as good as the original. Now, the first level photocopy might be very, very close, but then if you photocopied the photocopy and then photocopied that and then photocopied that, each time the quality will get less and less and less and less. Editing kind of does the same thing. That each time, each kind of it, and there are some edits which can kind of degrade an image a lot more, and some which are a little bit more subtle, but each kind of editing you're doing starts to degrade the image. Now, if you start off with a high resolution photo, which was taken with a low ISO, is sharp where it needs to be sharp, soft where it needs to be soft, and is as good a technical quality as you can get, then you can do a lot more editing with it before the level of degradation starts to make itself felt. But if I take a photo and it's fairly dark and I boost up the lightness, it gets noisier. And so then I have to start adjusting for the noise. Now, you might not notice it on a small print, but if I sort of print it up big, suddenly you would really notice it. Your particular picture here, because it's a very low resolution image to start with, when you shoved it into black and white and whatever other bits you've done to that edit, it's degraded so far that all you can see these huge pixels on it. So if you think about the fact that really, and this is true of any bit of photography, what you're really wanting to do is get the best possible quality of photo that you can under the circumstances before you start. So, you know, you do all the adjustments in the camera to get the best quality you can under the circumstances, so that when you take that photo back to your editing software, you've got far more options open to you. So just as we talked earlier about, we talked before about the idea of, you know, take your photo in color so that you've got the options to adjust it, do different black and white kind of settings. You also want to take it in the best possible quality you can so that you can make adjustments to it and minimize the layers of degradation. So that's really, I think, the best thing to try and get across to you, Roy. You've obviously got several different ways, you know, we talked before, there's several different ways you can convert to black and white, and whether you prefer to have a dark dome against a lighter background or a light dome against the darker background is down to your choice. It's your aesthetic, and it's about you finding your voice, what appeals to you, and what appeals to you won't necessarily appeal to somebody else, and that's fine, that's okay. But what you do want to try and do is try and get the best version of whatever it is you're doing. That's always the kind of thing to keep in mind. So I hope that helps a bit, Roy. Right, okay, where are we at? So VG says, editing is a great challenge for me. I need to get better at it. Hence, I've been picking up old photos and trying to edit them. The challenge here is the ladle. So let's flip you over. So this was VG's original photo. So she's got the ladle in some spices in a lovely wooden bowl. And in fact, I seem to remember she entered this, I can't remember, it was a few months ago now, but she put this picture in. And it's bright and colourful, and I really quite like it. I think we talked a little bit about depth of focus at this point, because what you can notice here is the sharpest part of the photo is actually this sort of here on the edge of the spices. The ladle itself has started to go out of focus by the time we get back there, and it's not totally in focus on the front of the bowl either. So it's a relatively narrow depth of field, and if you'd focused on the handle, more of the bowl would have been out of focus. If you focused on the front, then more of the spice would have been out of focus. So that notion of where it's focused becomes an important part of this. However, that was what I think we talked about last time. This time, what VG was saying is she's been trying to edit and adding on to different backgrounds. And she's done 2 different edits. She played around. She put this one where, what she's, for those who remember the yellow wall with the little green water pump, she's taken that texture and she's placed the picture on that. And then she did another version here where she's cut it out to put on a picture of a tabletop as well. And but in terms of, so she's cut it out, this is the original photo, she's cut it out of here and put it on here, but when you get to the edges, it's looking a bit rough. It's not too great. It does look like it's been sort of cut out and stuck on. So basically she goes on, she's wanting to know what a way she could have done the editing a little bit better. She says also with this one, she couldn't get these spices that were sort of sitting around to work, so she cropped them out of this version of the edit. What we're talking about here is the problems of cutting something out and then placing it into another photo, whether that's or whether you're either taking another background and editing it into your photo, or whether you're cropping it out of the main photo and then editing onto another one. The problem is that it's not an easy thing to do convincingly. And there are people who have spent years and years in Photoshop doing this to try and make, and they become very skilled at it. But it's not something you can do that easily. And there are a few things that play against you. Now, one of the core things here is our eyes as humans are very good at spotting what's not quite right. Our brains, we evolved over millions of years. Our little mammalian shrew-like ancestors, and probably even before that, evolved to notice that if something wasn't right, we would notice it. So that if our ancestors are walking through the jungle and there's a patch over there which doesn't quite look like it ought to, we need to notice it. We need to notice it in case there's a predator hiding in there. Those who didn't notice it got eaten, didn't pass on their genes. We are not descended from those who were mindless and didn't notice these things. We are descended from the paranoid, the obsessive compulsive, those who survived. There's a wonderful saying, which I was just reminded of this morning, which is the brain hasn't evolved to make us happy. The brain has evolved to keep us alive. And it's an important thing to know, especially if you're suffering from any kind of mental health problems. The brain is designed to try and keep us alive. Mental health problems come when something gets caught up and it's not reacting quite the way that it should. That's an entirely different tangent. The point is with this is that in photography, we also notice what isn't right very quickly. So we can look at a photo like this, and that's, and this looks fine. And we move to this, and it doesn't quite look right. And it doesn't quite look right because the handle is too soft on the edges. But there's another thing that's going on here, which is the depth of focus isn't right. That basically what happens is it's slightly blurry at the front of the bowl, then it's sharp where that little where the spices have started falling away, then it goes out of focus by the time you get to the handle, but then the wall is sharp again. And it just doesn't work like that. We know that you will go from blurred to sharp to blurred. You don't go blurred, sharp, blurred, sharp. So that immediately makes it look out of place. Similarly with here, the background is sharper than the handle, which it wouldn't be. So this is one of those things that you kind of have to keep your eye on when you're editing. If you are going to take something and you're going to place it in another photo, there are several things that need to work. First of all, you need to make sure that when you cut it out and you place it in, the edges don't look off. You've got, there's parts where you maybe need to soften them, but there's parts where you might need quite a hard line, depending on how the light is falling and how it relates to the background. Second part is it needs to be lit the same way, it needs to be lit from the same angle. If you've got the main source of the light coming from the left in one photo and you put it into something where the main source of light is coming from the right in another, it's just not going to look right. Thirdly, it's far more difficult to take something which has been photographed against a light background and put it against a dark background than it is to put it against a similar. So if you're going to, if you've got something which is, taken against a bright yellow background, it's easier to paste it against something else which is a bright yellow background rather than a dark blue background, and vice versa. Because it's partly to do with how the pixels at the edge are sort of overlapping with the pixels next to them on the background, but it's also to do with where light would be reflecting as well. If you've got a bowl and it was sitting on a blue table, it would have a different subtle reflected light in the wood than if you had that bowl on a yellow table. So you've got to get the colour schemes right, you've got to get the light and darkness right, you've got to get the angle of the lighting right, you've got to cut it out right, and you've got to get the depth of focus right. All these things stacked up together make it very, very difficult to do without an awful lot of practice. So don't beat yourself up if you can't do it straight away. You just need a lot of practice. But what I would say is maybe don't try and start too complicated to begin with. Start with something simple. Take a photo of something and then cut it out and place it against a similar background, and then work on the light, work on the bits and pieces, or there was another bit actually, I think one of these things on that picture, Morven actually said she spent the day editing too, and says, not sure I like editing, but see it as a necessary component to photography. The thing is with editing is a way of polishing, up what you've created, of trying to get the best version of what you've created. If you are editing just for the sake of editing, that's fine for learning the skill, but it's not necessarily going to make your photo any better. And the best form of editing is it comes down to that thing of understand the story, understand the narrative of the photo to begin with. If your photo is, if you know what it is about the photo that you like, is it the melancholic mood? Is it that streak of light against the dark? Is it that flash of orange against the blue? Is it that it uplifts you? Is it that it sort of takes you off into another world? What is it about that photo? Why did you pick up your camera and point it at that in the first place? And the clearer you can identify that, the easier it then becomes to then decide what you're going to do next. Because like I said, when I did the me and the trilby there with the grumpy face, because I was going with that kind of melancholic grumpy feel, the original version without the lightsaber, I desaturated the colours. Because it wasn't supposed to be a bright, sparkly, happy photo, in order to sort of add to that mood, I softened down the colours and sort of greyed it out a little bit. Didn't get rid of the colours completely. I didn't go full black and white, but I did take quite a bit of the colour out. And that's because what it did was that helped emphasise that particular story. When I came to do the lightsaber was actually much more about the glow of the red. And actually at that point, having a desaturated background didn't work as well. So I went back a level and then I did a slight blue shift on it in order to create a contrast, because the lightsaber, the story with that, the visual story with that, is much more about colour and clash of colour and how colour affects, how a red or white wand would essentially affect the colour of the person that was holding it. So primarily when any sort of editing happens, understand the story, and then that will help you to decide what you do next. So to move on then, the next photo comes from where are we? Comes from Morven. And where are we? So Morven said, okay, taking on board what I'm learning from you, this picture does not tell a story. However, I have been feeling adventurous for me and fiddling with all sorts of editing settings and come up with this, which I particularly like. It's a strange anemone plant in my garden which has gone to seed and produced these strange space-like seed heads. Happy to accept comments, critique, even thumbs down, because it's all about learning for me. Now, so you've got out into the garden, you found this strange anemone, you've taken photos, there's lots of lines, there's lots of little water droplets, there's contrast, there's shape, and that's what's caught your attention. But you then you say you're quite happy with what you've done then, playing with the editing. So that's a good start. And if you're happy with that, really that's all you need. But your next bit is though that you are asking for some kind of feedback. And at that point, or rather a little bit later, I did ask you if you'd got the original picture so that I could see what you got in order to make adjustments against it. And basically you said at that point, Morven, no, I didn't save the original. Sorry. So at this point, slap on the wrist. It's worth saying, and it's worth remembering, that when you come to editing your photo, always keep the original. Just edit a copy of it. The moment you start editing, do File, Save As, and give it a different title. Even if your picture is called IMG_1234, call it IMG_1234A or B, or give it a different name, Edit 1 or something like that. And then that way you've still got the original. So that what happens is the part of the problem here when you're asking for sort of feedback or how you might have edited it differently is I don't know, because I don't know what the original looked like. You know what the original looked like. I have no idea because I didn't see it. And because you haven't been able to supply me with the original one, I don't know where else you could. I don't know how you've cropped it. I don't know what colour shifts you've done to it. I don't know what was able to be saved or brought out or enhanced from it. So it does make it far more difficult for me to be able to say what else you might have done with it. It's full of texture, so I think there are maybe things you could have done with particular sliders to enhance that texture. I don't know, this is very green uniformly across. I wonder if the colour in the background had been slightly different, that it might have actually enhanced the impact of the anemone colour. Sometimes when you're playing with colours, that actually right, I'll tell you what I'll do here. I didn't save this photo because I wasn't actually expecting to use it, but I do want to just show you what I mean when I talk about that notion of having a contrast in colour in order to emphasise the colour you're actually looking for. No, I don't have it. That's odd. I was looking. Oh wait, okay. Well, let's just use this one. So just a close-up macro photo of a daisy I took, and it's a very green background. Now we know the white petals of a daisy, and these white petals often have just a little hint of purple on them. And what I've done actually in this is I've actually enhanced that sort of slight purple tint into the petals, because it then stands out that much more against the green background. I did have another dandelion somewhere, which anyway, I can't find it. It would take me too long, so we'll just not worry too much about that for the moment. But that's really what I wanted to try and say about this one, Morven, is the big lesson to learn from this is always keep your original photo. It's like when we're talking about editing there, and I was talking about doing layers, and part of the reason for doing layers is so that you can always go back to your original. If you make the adjustment on a separate layer, then you've still got your original, and if you change your mind or you get a new idea or you want to explore something else, you've still got the original that you can go back to. So this is good for anybody who's starting out editing photos. Always make a copy and edit the copy. Always keep an original version of the photo somewhere, and then that way you can always go back and start again. If all else fails, you can start again, or you can have other ideas and take that photo and explore it in different ways. So hope that helps. Right, okay. Where are we now? So let's close that. April's here, says hi everyone. Jim says hi everyone, just joined from Dumfries. A bit late in, but I'm sure you'll be able to catch up. We're glad you could make it, April and Jim. April says, what colour would everyone choose for the background colour? And Parisa Ali says, someone say hi to me. Well, hi. Welcome. Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. So, where are we? Okay, yeah, other background colour. Basically, I think if you are having that green, you want some kind of complementary colour to it, but, you know, maybe something of a different tone. It's one of those you would play with, really. Blue would have a different effect to it than a red. Red would probably dominate. You don't really want to have a red in the background, I don't think, because it would draw the eye too much away. Sandra's saying maybe a background. That's certainly a possibility. A purplish background, or, you know, there's different ways you could do, but I think you still need to have the original to know what it is that you're playing against. Now that it's all green, it makes it much harder to make any adjustments, because if you try and select the background, you'll end up sort of selecting the main flower while you're at it. Okay, Becca suggests darkening the background as well. Yes, that would certainly help the texture to stand out. Right, okay, so on to the last image now that I wanted to talk about, and this is from Inger. Now, Inger had up in Norway went off and spent time in a treehouse, some 9 meters off the ground. So where's the treehouse photo? There we go. So this was the photo she put in and said, I spent a night in a treetop hut 9 meters above the ground. This was the emergency exit. Now, this is too busy a photo and not very good in any senses, but my question is, how can you give a sensation or recreate the depth when you take a photo looking down? And I thought that's a really, really interesting question. And it is one of those things that we are often faced with. So here we can see that we're looking down. We can see a ladder here, and we're attached to the trees. She made a point of the fact that this wasn't the only way up or down. This was in fact the emergency exit, and it does look a bit scary if you had to try and climb up and down it. And you can tell that it's down, but you're not really getting much of a sense of the height. 9 meters is big, you know, that's 30 feet off the ground if you talking imperial measurements. So how do you get a sense of that kind of height? And so what we're talking about is height and depth in photos. And that then there's a whole bunch of different tips and technique or tricks and techniques you can use to add more depth, give that illusion of depth, because it's all illusion. The fact is, these photos that we love to create are two-dimensional. They're just dots on a flat screen, or they're ink droplets on a flat piece of paper. We want to try and create the illusion of depth. We want to have that sense that we could kind of fall into the photo, or not literally fall out of the tree, but that sense that, what would that feeling be like? How do I enhance that feeling? So when Inger was there looking down the trap door, you get that vertigo feeling where your stomach sort of slightly goes and whoa, that's a height. How do you capture that in a photo? Now, in essence, there's a handful of different ways of getting a sense of depth. Now, there's two key elements to distance. And that distance is whether you are looking down to a trapdoor, whether you are looking off into the landscape, or whether you're standing at the bottom looking up at a tall tree or a tall building. The same things apply. One is the nearer an object is, the bigger it is. The further away it is, the smaller it is. So if you have two objects where one is closer, and also where two objects which we think of as being the same size, and one is larger and one is smaller, we will naturally assume the smaller one is further away. So my hand's the same size. This hand is now smaller. It's further away. On a flat screen, you can't necessarily tell. I might have one big hand and one small hand. Now it's a small hand and a larger hand again. So now this hand is so large, it's larger than my head. So we've got that. Now the second thing is, and it relates, but is perspective lines. That basically, if you have two lines, they converge in the distance. These two things are the bit that you're trying to really capture. These are the things which you're trying to make sense of. Is a distance, things in a distance are going to be smaller and lines are going to converge. So let me talk then a little bit about, or show you a couple of versions of. So here's a photo, Castle Douglas, snowy day, looking down the high street. And here we've got those converging lines. So all those lines are pointing straight down the middle of that photo. And we know that, because of all our experience, that the road is in fact parallel. That if you and your friend walked either side of that road, you would stay the same distance apart from the top to the bottom. However, as we look into the photo here, it gets smaller as it gets further down. The lines get closer together. So therefore we have this sense of depth. We have this sense of movement going down through the image. Another version of this, guitar strings. With this, again, the neck is getting smaller as it's going down. But what we've also introduced into this is using the notion of depth of focus with your camera as well. So if you use a relatively narrow depth of focus, or so you've got a relatively wide aperture, then stuff in the foreground or wherever you decide to focus, that's going to be in focus, and stuff in the distance is going to be out of focus. So if you notice on this, it's around this fret, just by the edge of the guitar there, it's the 15th fret, that's in focus. And as we come further back, it goes out of focus, and as we go further forward, it goes more and more out of focus. And that in itself is not just the fact that the lines are converging as it gets further away, but the focus is going more out of focus. So if we've got something in focus and then we can relate it to what's going out of focus, that too gives us a sense of depth. Here's another one where what we're playing with is, here we've got two aerial acrobats, aerial dancers, and we've got one here up on her ribbons, and then we've got one down here. Now this one is being framed by the silks that are coming down from the other one. But we also, because they are both wearing the same, well, it's two people, they're both wearing the same outfit, they're both hanging down, we know that they will be more or less the same size. So the fact that this one at the bottom is so much smaller than the one at the top, again, helps give us that sense of the fact that she is obviously further away. And the fact that we have these silks hanging down here is kind of framing that as well. We've got something in the foreground to focus on to give us a sense of scale and depth. And then finally, I think probably one of the best examples I've got of this is this photo of down on a beach. So we have both the sense of the converging lines, where we've got the wet of the sea, where where it's wet on the edge of the beach, moving up here, and then we've got the edge of the waves of the sea moving in here, and so we've got that lovely kind of converging triangle. Even got the edge of the dunes over on the right, and they're coming together. At the same time, we have a figure on the right, and then we have other figures off in the distance. And we instinctively know that, okay, even if these people over here were smaller than the person standing here, they wouldn't be that much smaller. There is a range. We're not even kind of lilliput here. So we know that those people must be further away. And so all these things conspire. So big, small, depth of focus if you're playing with that, something in the foreground, something in the background, converging lines. These are all the tricks that you need in order to give the illusion of depth of what is otherwise a two-dimensional surface. So from that then, if we go back to your original picture. So from this angle, you're not really getting everything that you wanted out of it. So what could you do in order to have more of an effect, given everything we've started with? Well, I would say one of the first things you could do is if you were the other side of the trapdoor, so that you're actually up against the ladder, and then if you were sort of literally perched on the edge of the ladder, looking down the length of the ladder, then that sense of converging lines as it went down, especially with the slats getting closer and closer together, it would look more like this kind of, this effect, or rather, okay, let's say it would look more like the road. As the road kind of comes down, so the ladder would be going down as well. If you were to use the effect of your aperture, you could focus on one or two of the slats, have a few of the slats nearer the top that are in sharp focus, and then you allow the focus to drop away as the slats move further down. That too would give us a sense of depth. This idea of framing becomes another one. If you then stood up from the trapdoor and actually took a shot down, so you got the trapdoor itself in the shot, then the frame then becomes your kind of anchor point for the top. And then that's going to emphasize the fact that anything that's the other side of that is obviously further away. A bit like looking through a window. Sometimes you can use this effect, say, taking a photo out the window, but you include part of the window frame. And what it does is it anchors you here, and it makes whatever's the other side of the window automatically seem further away. And then finally, the other bit, which you don't have in your photo, but you would need to arrange, would be to have something at the bottom which is in contrast to where we are at the top. If you had a person standing at the bottom looking up, like they're shouting or they're waving or they're tying up a rope or doesn't really matter, but if you had a person down at the bottom, we know roughly in our heads what a person looks like, and so the scale of that person would give us an indication of the height or the depth of that 9 meters down from the treehouse. So I hope that helps, that it's really ultimately understanding that it's about this notion of perspective in lines and small, big, closer, further away. And then the other trick that you've got is you can adjust your aperture to create a depth of focus. And between these things, these are the tools you then have to give you that sense of depth. So I hope that helps. Right, okay, let's close all those little windows there and come back. Oh, April says she likes the guitar shot. Becca says Maggie looks cold. Yes, on that beach it was a cold wind blowing. This is true. Lots of layers. Inga says was impossible to climb from the ground. Started 2.5 meters above. All right, so you're already 2.5 meters up before you even started, was it? Right, cool. Right, well, that's pretty much us. I think that's us at the end of I've gone through the photo. Oh, right, Inga says, very useful. Thanks a lot, Kim. I'm glad. I'm pleased with that. And Stacey says, good explanation of depth. Excellent. Jim says you could use the perspective tool or could you use the perspective tool or deform tool? Well, this is true. You can always grab pictures and then change them afterwards in Photoshop to an extent. But kind of as I was sort of saying earlier, one of the things I think is you want to try and get the best you can in camera first, so that the editing is, because whenever you edit, you essentially degrade the photo to an extent. The more editing you have to do, the more degradation happens. The less options you then have open to you. So the more you can do it in camera, the more editing options are open to you afterwards. So, but I think really with something like this, and Inga's question was about what could she have done in order to, and I think really it's about understanding those tools for perspective, and if you can do that, then that gives you, and then fine, go into the editing. You can darken and lighten patches as well, which can also sometimes have an impact as well. So like I say, that's pretty much us. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. Thank you for everybody who sent in an image and for questions. Get your photos in for next week. Let me know where your sticking points are, and or whatever questions you've got, whether it's about editing, photography, and I will do my best to help. Next week I'm going to be talking about Mr. Pook's kitchen. They're literally just a handful of doors, 3 doors I think down from my house. There's a restaurant called Mr. Pook's. It's quite an amazing restaurant, and I did year before last, I did quite a big photo shoot for them. And I was going to talk about it, and then but we've been in lockdown. They've been closed. There didn't seem much point. Anyway, they're opening again on the 19th. So I thought, well, given the fact that the next podcast is on the 18th, I may as well do that, talk about that one as well. So, we're going to talk about a restaurant and a photo shoot I did there, and the setup that I did. So I hope you'll find that one interesting. Great. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed the evening, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. And right, okay, come back here, find that, and then click off. Good night, everyone.